report.
Tonight, more heat on the immigration minister.
This minister has to go.
Plus, the last Liberal government in the country calls a snap election. Is it about to go under as well? And on that, how smart and an adult was it for federal coalition politicians to go on the ABC to talk about each other like this?
Idiot, thug, turd, dead.
There's a lot more of that coming up. It's incredible. You've got to ask, what has got into these people? Also tonight, understanding the Brittany Higgins curse. 2 court cases today involving 3 people who were burned, plus a lawyer, again, now under fire, really. And some magazine tries to get away with writing a column by me using artificial intelligence. The results, I have to tell you, have shocked me. But first, these massive blackouts in Victoria. We warned you this would be our future with Labor's global warming schemes. And now you see it. The worst blackout Victoria's ever had. 500,000 homes and businesses without power yesterday. 127,000 homes still without power as of a few minutes ago. And some won't get power restored for days. Now, Victorians were warned that they'd face summer blackouts while politicians mad with global warming schemes went about destroying their electricity system. Get rid of coal. Now, Australia's energy market operator has warned for years, again last August, that Eastern Australia was running out of power, faced summer blackouts, first in Victoria and South Australia, and then the other eastern states. But Victoria's government is today blaming catastrophic extreme weather. Not themselves at all, no. Knowing that that is actually code for global warming. And who can blame them for that?
That's basically been because of the really extreme weather events, very, very high winds. We've seen high winds of up to 100 kilometres an hour. That's really high speed.
Hang on there. Winds of 100 kilometres an hour? Well, it is true that high winds did bring down transmission wires, and that caused 4 generators at the Loy Yang plant to trip and load shedding to start. Not so much because of they didn't have enough power, but about the instability, up and down power. They couldn't get what they were making out there. It just threatened the whole system. Now, we're yet to understand exactly why and how this all played out. But some things we do already know. First, yesterday's winds, 100 kilometres an hour, said the minister. Catastrophic. Well, actually, I heard some others say it could have even touched 130. Very, they are high winds. But we have actually had winds that high or higher before. Last year, the year before that. Winds at Mount Hotham even reached nearly 200 kilometres an hour in 2005. And there were no records of, record blackouts then. No, some things have changed. Victoria's government, for instance, helped force shut the giant Hazelwood power station 7 years ago. It was even blown up. So yesterday, not many alternatives. So Victoria had to scramble for supplies of electricity from gas turbines and from interstate, reliable, baseload sort of stuff, to replace the downed generators. Had to pay a colossal $16,000 plus per megawatt hour for about 2 hours before the price fell to the more normal $67. There's a third problem with this mad push for renewables. The wind and solar power we've spent billions on didn't save Victoria. In fact, the problem was even made worse by the temporary loss of wind power from central and western Victoria. And of course, when the sun went down, there was no solar power at all. And that's the problem with renewables, of course. You just can't bank on it being there when you need it most. And a fourth problem? Under the Albanese government's green dream, we have to get 82% of our electricity from renewables in just 6 years from now. And we have to build 10,000 kilometres of transmission wires to join up all these new wind and solar plants. There'll be wires all over the shop. And that means many, many more towers to blow over as well, and wires to clash and potentially cause fires and, well, anyway. And finally, I've got to have some pity on the new homeowners who heeded the Victorian government's campaign to ban gas connections. Now, doesn't this blackout prove how stupid that is? Now, if you do have gas, like me, or like this bloke over here. You could at least cook and boil water during the blackout or fire up a generator as I did. But under this government's mad plans, once the power goes out, it's all out now if you don't have gas. You've got the aircon, that's out, the heating, the cooking, the lights, you've got no alternative, that's it. So, as we've just seen, Victoria doesn't have enough peaking or baseload power like gas, the fossil fuel to keep the system stable at moments like this. That's why there was the load shedding yesterday. Or to then restart the system quickly. Coal takes ages to get ready again. And former energy executive Paul Broad says, well, sorry, but this is Victoria's future, not just Victoria's either, thanks to Victoria's global warming madness and its crazy hatred of fossil fuel.
Victoria needs more gas plants. Victoria has a lot of gas, a lot of onshore gas. The madness of not accessing Victorian gas puts them on a knife's edge. And sadly, Victorians are going to have to get accustomed to regular brownouts.
And to think this government's doing all this anti-fossil fuel stuff to save us from catastrophic extreme weather, just after, in fact, Melbourne had its first January without a single hot day, not one over 35 degrees. First time that's happened since 1984. Sweat on that while the power is out. Or if you still have power, how long before this laugh is on you? But if global warming policies have added to the danger of blackouts like this, Treasurer Jim Chalmers hasn't learned the lesson. Even today, he was promising much more of the same.
And we share the objective of a future increasingly powered by cleaner and cheaper and increasingly more renewable energy into the future.
Now, joining me to explain just what happened is electricity engineer Ben Beattie. He's the host of the Baseload podcast, which talks about our energy system. Ben Beattie, thank you so much for joining us. What did cause 500,000 Victorians to lose their electricity?
Oh, good day, Andrew. Well, you have some transmission lines blown down in a critical part of the system. And as a result, you have some generators and a big voltage disturbance across the grid. So that's going to be part of it. And some of that we don't know for sure which generators tripped and why, although we do know that one of the big coal units, power stations in Latrobe Valley went off. There's also a lot of minor damage to the lower voltage systems throughout the state. So in that region where there's been that strong wind, you'll see crews going out there very busily trying to get the place back on. But yeah, when you have a disturbance of this kind in the electricity network, it can wreak havoc.
But was it made worse by getting rid of coal-fired power stations like Hazelwood? Because the cost of trying to get the power to make good the losses was enormous.
Yeah, Hazelwood was what is unkindly referred to as an old clunker. But in situations like this where you have a big impact on the network, it's very difficult to predict what's going to stay on and stay off. Now, I suggest that in the wrap up to this, some of these generators that we're looking at that have gone off, and we'll talk about the wind turbines in a moment, but Loy Yang A is probably going to get a letter soon saying, please explain, because the generators beside it did not go off and they continued to maintain electricity. Now, one of the difficulties with transmission lines down, especially key 500 kilovolt transmission lines that were damaged, is that suddenly you don't have anywhere to transmit all the electricity from all your power stations. So it's an added complication and an added factor on top of the situation.
The wind power went down by 2/3 over the afternoon, just to make it worse. And of course, solar vanished completely when the sun went down, as you'd expect. That just made it all worse. Are these then the kinds of blackouts we risk seeing more of over the next few years as we get rid of coal without having enough baseload power to replace it?
Yeah, reliability is a real concern, especially with weather-dependent generators like wind and solar. If you look at some of the data from yesterday, and there's any number of visualizations around, you can see that wind was actually ramping down from midday in Victoria and dropped, like you said, a whole lot of megawatts off. And solar was doing much at all. So the reliability of a system is called into question when you have, 500,000 nearly people off the network.
And do you expect more of the same?
I think with transmission lines in particular, they can be very difficult to protect. So they're always exposed to some kind of risk, whether it's fire, strong wind, even impact, say from traffic. When you have a transmission line like this that's so key to the network taken down, and then you have wider damage, I don't think there's much you can actually do about that. You could build stronger transmission towers, of course. That would be something to look at. And structurally, I'm an electrical engineer, so structural side of it is not my forte. But when you have more transmission lines, you tend to create more risk and more cost. Now, there's certainly more cost in more transmission lines, but will they save the network? Well, if they were propped up by old coal clunkers, then maybe, but not if they're propped up by wind turbines and solar panels, which are going to turn off anyway.
Ben Beattie, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.
The poor Liberals, right? They've only got one Liberal government left in the entire country, and it's now just called a snap election. 20 months of turmoil. Here's Tasmanian Premier Jeremy Rockliff this afternoon calling this March 23 election after two former Liberals who quit his government, they're now independents, wouldn't make a deal with him to give him the numbers for the year ahead.
This election is about who is best able to restore stability and certainty, so Tasmania can take action on the issues affecting you right now. We do have a strong plan, which is all about addressing these important issues, but the Parliament has become unworkable. I'm not going to allow myself or my government to be held to ransom for the next 12 months. It's bad for Tasmania and it's bad for Tasmanians.
Joining me are Cameron Milner, former Chief of Staff to Labor leader Bill Shorten and now Director of GXO Strategies, and Michael Costa, former New South Wales Labor Treasurer. Cameron, is the last Liberal government in the country about to go down as well?
Well, it looks that way, doesn't it, in terms of Rockliff. He picked it wrong on The Voice because he was a yes man. He picked it completely wrong on this stadium as well. AFL might be popular in Tasmania, but the stadium certainly isn't. So he looks like he's going to go to the election with all the wrong priorities.
Well, you mentioned the stadium, Michael. This has to be the first election where one of the biggest issues is whether the government is right to build a massively expensive new football stadium and to get an AFL team from the AFL as part of the deal to go with it. And what a coincidence. The AFL is going to reveal the new team's name and jersey on March 18, just 5 days before Election Day. Like I say, what a coincidence. But is that a winner?
I don't think it is, Andrew. And the reason I say that is that at the end of the day, you've got to form a government. And one of the things that's happening in this election, I think, is they're increasing the size of their lower house, from, I think, 24 to 35. I mean, with a Hare-Clark system, proportional representation system, you are going to find even more instability after the election, I would have thought. And remember, this is just an absurd proposition to increase the size of the lower house because they'll end up with one MP for every 18,000 people down there. And you can see that clearly that's going to be a recipe for disaster and stable government. So he's calling election on stable government, and he's probably going to end up with less stable government. As for the stadium, it's not just the cost, Andrew. They've also signed a deal to subsidise this club for, a decade or so, at a time when they've got budget deficits and, some rising debt, and their GST share is actually declining. So I think the whole place is a bit of a mess. Maybe Victoria should take it over. On second thoughts, given the mess down there, maybe that's a dumb idea too.
Thank you. We're running out of cash. Thank you, mate. No. Cameron, the heat was on Immigration Minister Andrew Giles in Parliament again today after he released 149 criminals, including 7 murderers and 37 sex offenders from detention after a High Court decision, admittedly. But today, finally, he did at least finally, unambiguously say that he did know now where they all were. Here he is.
The location of every individual in this cohort is known.
So there is that. But Andrew Giles still hasn't said why he skipped 3 meetings in his office before these people were released, these criminals were released, to work out legal options for that day. He instead went to London and shot a video promoting The Voice and also went to another Voice event. How much trouble is this guy in?
Well, he should be in heaps of trouble because the 140 odd people should be locked up still. So he's not done his job there. But look, Andrew Giles is a political dilettante. He's a factional mate of Anthony Albanese, so he'll be protected for as long as Albanese is there. He'll be able to continue to make the sorts of mistakes he's making. But he reminds me, though, of someone who's not waving, just drowning.
Yeah, look, I don't know. It's weird that I feel so sorry for him. But, Michael, I mean, sometimes, you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And if he just stands there, you know, absorbing it like a sponge and is still there at the end, maybe that's a survival tactic. I don't know. What do you make of this guy?
Oh, look, I think he's hopeless too. But, you know, there's a few of them that are hopeless in that government, as you know. I wouldn't put him at the top of the hopeless list. I think Bowen and Burke are still up there. But clearly he has deflected the government from what was a good political strategy on the tax cuts. And now we're back to where they were prior to Christmas. And that's the last place they want to be going into a by-election. And as for him knowing where everybody is, that's not the issue. The issue is if something occurs while these people are out in the community, and there's a high probability of that, given that they're not under detention, the government's going to wear it. And, you know, I'd be petrified if I was the Prime Minister with that scenario.
They must check their briefings each morning thinking, please, please, no more arrests. I mean, the blackouts of Victoria, Cameron, how do you think that's going to play politically? Because people are going to, whether it's fairly or not fairly, and I think there are some issues at play here, say, look, there's green politics involved here, and here's the government putting its, you know, the pedal to the metal on green energy.
Well, it's one thing to have a solar farm, but it's all the transmission lines that are going to be dotted all over Victoria to make this thing work. So people are paying more and more for their power. They want reliability. So the last thing they want to see is that green dream become a blackout. And that's what they're seeing, obviously, in terms of the lack of stability in the power grid in Victoria. And that's a huge problem.
Mm-hmm. And the thing too is, isn't it, Michael, that whether it's connected or not, green policies, and I think there are connections, the point is people are now going to see, oh my God, this is what a blackout looks like. When they're warning of more blackouts in the future, I don't want any part of that. It's simple as that, isn't it?
Well, I think the issue with the stability of the system is the key. I mean, people haven't picked up on the point that we're going to have 10,000 kilometres of additional transmission lines. Now, the system's vulnerable even in a small state like Victoria under a weather event, and leaving aside the generation component of it. What's going to happen with these 10,000 kilometres of transmission lines? Any one of these things can go down, and if it's a critical one, it's going to cause enormous stability problems. Look, the solution is for Victoria to focus again back on base load, and, you know, Paul Broad in your lead-in was absolutely correct. They need to have some gas peakers, and they need to have the system more robust. And, you know, other states have had to deal with this challenge. It's not a new challenge. Victoria's behind the 8 ball here.
And don't forget, Victoria, the government there banned gas exploration, even on land, for nearly the best part of a decade. So that's incredible. Just finally, Cameron, the way race politics has distracted this government. I mentioned Andrew Giles skipping crucial meetings to go to Voice events. Even now, distracted after the defeat of The Voice last year. The Indigenous Australians Minister went on radio today to say she wanted children to be taught activism of our supposed, you know, the activist line, the truth-telling of our supposed race history. Here she is.
Will we see the truth-telling process begin in this term of government?
The issue of truth-telling is incredibly important, and there are many ways in which that can happen, including school curriculum.
Cameron, I just can't understand it. Pushing more race politics down the throats of children, this government hasn't learned.
Well, they failed amongst the over 18s and the voting population, so they're obviously trying to start with the under 18s in their schools. Look, they've really mucked this up. I mean, it was voice, treaty, and truth and treaty. They failed on the voice, and the fact they want to teach our children rather than accept the voting public of the over 18s is appalling.
Andrew, they're already doing it.
I think so too. Yeah, I know, but this clearly is putting, a firecracker behind it. They want even more of it. If you don't like what you're getting now, imagine more.
Anybody's got a child at school for the last 10 years has been exposed to this sort of nonsense in the school curriculum. And, the truth-telling, is it going to be about William Buckley or Bruce Pascoe? I don't mind a balanced view.
I think so. It will be, guaranteed, Michael. It will be. It will be. Michael Costa, Cameron Milner, thank you to you both. After the break, Queensland has actually stood down after taking firm action. And the curse of Brittany Higgins, 3 people in courts today after getting involved. The Brittany Higgins case seems to have the kiss of death to almost all who touch it. Now, Higgins is the former Liberal staffer who claims she was raped in Parliament House by colleague Bruce Lehrmann, who denies it and is suing Channel 10 and presenter Lisa Wilkinson for allegedly defaming him. Well, Higgins still hasn't proved her case, but got $2.4 million from the Albanese government for her supposed bad treatment by the Liberals in office after that rape, and is now living in France. But while she and her boyfriend are seeing the sights back home, chaos everywhere. 2 court hearings today involving people who took her side, plus a lawyer. Joining me is Chris Merritt, Vice President of the Rule of Law Institute of Australia. He also writes for the Australian newspaper. Chris, great to see you. Now, Lisa Wilkinson, Channel 10 presenter, she actually had a win in court today, didn't she, after claiming Channel 10 threw her under a bus by not telling people that she was actually following their legal advice when she gave a speech at the Logies just before the trial, suggesting Higgins had told the truth about Lehrmann raping her. What happened today?
Look, it's an extraordinary win for Lisa Wilkinson, but a terrible, terrible day for Network 10. Had Lisa Wilkinson not won today, she was in the gun for about $1 million in legal costs in having separate representation in this defamation dispute with Bruce Lehrmann. But now that that's out of the way, the main game gets underway, which is the argument between Mr. Lehrmann and Network 10 and Lisa Wilkinson over was he defamed. Now, even if, and this is where it's horrendous for 10, even if the case goes against Wilkinson and she's found to have defamed him, that bill, that damages bill, is required to be picked up by 10. So they're already in the gun for about $1 million. So if Lehrmann wins his case, the damages from Wilkinson's remarks, Wilkinson's action in this case, will be picked up by her alienated employer. But it gets worse. The fact that this argument ran, that Wilkinson was required to argue this case in court about should she have separate representation and should 10 pay for it, that brought to light a whole lot of material that will be used, almost certainly used, by Mr. Lehrmann in his argument for aggravated damages. It's now clear that this was not just a spur-of-the-moment series of remarks. This was an intentional speech. This is over a speech she gave at a Logies award ceremony. I think it was 8 days before the start of the aborted criminal trial, the rape trial of Mr. Lehrmann. So this was not just a spur-of-the-moment thing. This was vetted by the senior in-house lawyer at 10. 10 management signed off on it. So I think aggravated damages are a real possibility now that all this evidence brought forward by Lisa Wilkinson is on the public record. Now, that said, there's a big if. If Mr. Lehrmann wins. Now, that's a big if, and a lot of it will depend on whether he was identifiable in the material that was broadcast by 10. Not whether he was identified, but whether he was identifiable. So we've got a long way to run on this.
No, we have. I'm not saying that the case is over, but I tell you what, they've all gone through hell. The money's going out the back door. And the lawyer that gave the advice to Lisa Wilkinson was in court today getting a hard time from the judge about about the advice she gave. He seemed rather sceptical that it should have been offered. So that's another issue. That's two people. To the third person, the other case, the ACT Director of Public Prosecutions is in court. He was severely criticised by an inquiry led by Walter Sofronow QC for acting in ways that sure helped Brittany Higgins. He's upset. He's going to court. What's happening there?
Well, the former DPP, Mr Drumgold, is trying very hard to strike down the report of Mr Sofronow. His counsel has already argued, not today, but yesterday, that Mr Sofronow's mind was poisoned by his interaction, telephone calls and conversations with Janet Albrechtsen of The Australian, who I will disclose as a friend of mine. However, today, counsel for the ACT government, this is not Mr Sofronow's counsel, but the ACT government's counsel, made the point that, look, there's no foundation for that argument. Where's the evidence? There is no evidence, one, that Miss Albrechtsen was biased in what she wrote, or two, that any alleged bias had the effect of poisoning Mr Sofronow's mind against the DPP. So again, we're a long way to go on this, but there's a bit of a fight going on.
But Chris, again, everyone, Sofronow won't enjoy where he's at, even if he wins that case. Drumgold certainly doesn't. And then you got the lawyer of Channel 10, then you got Lisa Wilkinson, then you got Channel 10. Really, the message is, let justice take its course. Just shut up about cases until they're done. Chris Merritt, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Talk about justice. Queensland's new Premier, Stephen Miles. He's had a rough introduction to the job, I tell you again, with this first week of question time that is just going through. It's really been dogged by Queensland's crime problem, particularly its youth crime problem. For instance, I'm surprised, well, maybe there's something you don't get about this, but I'm surprised by the decision of the police chiefs in Queensland to stand down this man, Senior Sergeant Aaron Ottaway, after it's claimed he allowed officers to ram a car stolen by armed teenagers. They were still driving it on its rims after the tyres were punctured by police, so they rammed it. Joining me is Queensland Opposition Leader David Crisafulli. David, great to see you again. Look, there's been a public outcry about Sergeant Ottaway being stood down while this is being investigated. Do you understand that reaction?
Yeah, it's been an outcry from the officers and from the community. People are at a breaking point here, Andrew, in Queensland. They really are, and they just can't do this anymore, and they want change. And they're asking, what more is it going to take? What more is it going to take for the government to actually acknowledge we are in the grip of a youth crime crisis? It is worse in Queensland than anywhere else, and change must come. And when you see the outpouring of emotion for this, it just shows you how much it means to Queenslanders to get their safety back.
It's interesting, isn't it, David Crisafulli? He's being stood down for saying, authorising, ram that car, stop those young offenders. Just on Monday, though, we had, just to illustrate the trouble, I guess, 4 teenagers, one as young as 14, allegedly in a stolen car that rammed an unmarked police car, so this is going the other way now, and allegedly tried to run down the officer who fired back in self-defence. What is going on in your state?
The hunters have become the hunted. And you mentioned about unmarked police car being rammed. I have seen many police cars, marked police cars, that are getting rammed and taken off the road by these young crims. And they know that they are untouchable. Because when the government came to power in 2015, the first decision they took was to water down the Youth Justice Act. They skided about it. They said that that means there would be more young people in the community. Well, unfortunately now Queenslanders are living it, and they're living through a generation of untouchables. And they know that their rights are greater than the rights of the victim. Now, there's an election in this state in October, and I can tell you we're putting youth crime front and centre. It doesn't have to be this way. There is a better way. And we are going to rewrite the Youth Justice Act, and it's going to happen this year. And we're going to remove detention as a last resort. We're going to get serious about gold standard early intervention to try and turn kids around before a lifetime of crime. We're going to fix the broken resi care system that's not allowing kids to have discipline when they're in state care and get them to school. The Department of Child Safety is going to work again. It's going to be a front-loaded department where people are empowered to turn kids around. And we're not going to be afraid to rewrite the Youth Justice Act and embed consequences for actions. That's the only way we are going to fix the youth crime crisis that's ripping the heart through this state.
Now, David Christopher, it's now obviously law and order issue, and to some extent that's absolutely correct. It should be, right? Protect the community, pick up people who are committing life of crime, try to intervene in that way. But what do you think is actually driving this? Because some of the challenges to authority we're seeing, ramming police cars, some of the almost pornographic levels of violence, the kicking in people's heads and all that kind of stuff, that seems to me a little unusual. What do you think's driving it?
Andrew, I spent some time the other day with the family of Eileen White, a grandmother who went to the shops and never came home. And she was allegedly stabbed by a teen just wanting to get her car. And I've sat with many other victims in the youth crime crisis in this state. And I've looked them all in the eye and I've told them that we are going to drive change. Change has to occur. Now, there's no greater loss in a family than the loss of life. But I also speak to people every day who have lost the feeling of safety at home, parents who have to tell children that the bedroom that was violated the night before has to be a safe place again. I've spoken to tradies who can't make a living because their vehicle's not in the front yard. It's been stolen when they go out there and they go through all the rigmarole, rising insurance premiums, not being able to get to jobs. It's impacting Queenslanders every day. And when you hear that in the last 9 years since the government came to power, when you hear that the level of stolen cars has increased by over 100% and the level of break-ins are up by over 50%, you know that it is a crisis. And the last time those numbers fell was in the last year of an LNP government. And it can go down. And I keep saying to Queenslanders, it doesn't have to be like this. And it won't be like this.
Yeah,
if government changes, this is front and centre.
Law and order, absolutely. David, are you quite correct? I just wonder, when you get when I'm told of children who've learned about the ramming and the driving of stolen cars through things like Grand Theft Auto and running people down, and when you see some of the violence that seems to me straight off, YouTube clips and all that, I just wonder what's going on. David Christopher, thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. After the break, artificial intelligence. Now, a magazine has just got an artificial intelligence app to try to write like me. And the results, I have to tell you, are shocking. They're a crime against the English language. Plus, the abuse of coalition politicians for each other. How childish are these people? We're told artificial intelligence is going to do us all out of a job. It's going to take over the world. And I say no, because it absolutely sucks at writing. Now, you remember last week I quoted a writing tip from George Orwell in one of his essays, Politics in the English Language. Rule 1, maybe it was 2. Never use a long word where a short one will do. Now, I've followed that advice for years. There's similar tips to that. But the left-wing crikey gossip website has now done a mocking piece asking if News Corp journalists could replace, or News Corp rather, could replace me and other conservative writers by getting artificial intelligence apps to write our stuff instead. Like, it's easy, it's cookie cutter stuff. And it asked Microsoft's Bing AI to write 150 words in my style against the Albanese government's new law against bosses, pestering workers at home with calls or emails. Well, it turns out that AI cannot write clear prose at all. Writing supposedly as me, it starts, in our modern world, the concept of work-life balance has become a rallying cry for those who seek to undermine the very essence of productivity. Now, this is rubbish. In our modern world, that can go. Just that phrase can go. It's useless. It's just throat clearing, right? And the concept of work-life balance. I mean, how dead is that phrase? I wouldn't write that in a pink fit. And that bit, a rallying cry for for those who seek to undermine the very essence of productivity. I mean, flabby words everywhere. Does productivity actually have an essence? I'd use spell even if I did use a phrase like that. And how about this bombast, like it was written by some windbag after dinner speaker 2 centuries ago? Passionate professionals, do you like the alliteration? Passionate professionals thrive on the challenges that come their way, regardless of the hour. After all, the world doesn't stop spinning just because the sun sets, neither should our resolve to excel. I mean, for goodness sake, even when I was a teenager I wrote better than that. Foggy similes, dead phrases, flabby words drawn from the Latin and not from the Saxon. Regardless of the hour. Who writes like that? Our resolve to excel. Oh my God. Joining me on Culture Wars, Daniel Wild, Deputy Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, and Evelyn Ray, Sky News presenter and regular commentator on the show. Daniel, if I start writing like that, call the police because I've been kidnapped.
Well, Andrew, it's good to see that there is some sign of intelligence at Crikey, albeit in the artificial form, but that's some good progress that they've made there. Look, I think, Andrew, you make a good point, and it gets something a bit broader, really, which is, what's going to happen when we have the evolution of this technology and artificial intelligence making, misrepresentations. Now, in this case, they've openly said they're pretending to be you, but, as the technology gets better, what's going to happen as this interacts with laws around, misinformation, disinformation, when artificial representations are being made from others in our community and presenting those opinions as valid opinions. I think that that's something that we're really going to have to think through as a society, Andrew, because I think the technology is moving faster than our laws and also our customs.
But it scares me a bit, Evelyn, because I read that even my own company is making a lot of money by getting AI to write a lot of stuff, junior woodchuck kind of stuff, and getting away with it. If AI is writing stuff like that, we cannot, as journalists, be replaced that easily after all. Either that or we've got no taste.
I think it depends, Andrew, who you're competing against, who the AI is competing against. I think this is more of a reflection on the standards that are, writing these sorts of things. To be honest, AI can probably write a better essay than most of the ideological activists who pose as journalists. I've read more compelling scripts on a kebab shop menu than some of the rot that comes out of our mainstream media and leftist activist media. But, regardless of all this, what they wrote in the article...
That's an excellent point,
argument.
Because if you rely on jargon's easy to replicate. Original thought is not. But speaking of language, Daniel, and bad language, here are just some of the insults. We even had to beep a couple. We've got higher standards than the ABC. The insults that Liberals and national politicians used against each other in the 3-part series called Nemesis that the ABC's been running about the Abbott, Turnbull and Morrison governments. It is incredible how they speak about each other. Have a listen.
Terrorists, arrogant despised, ungracious, selfish, superficial,
narcissism,
idiot, smug, thug, one of the nastiest people, turd, duplicitous, fool, dead.
That's not all of it. What does that tell you, Daniel?
Well, it tells me a couple of things, Andrew. I think there's only one of the 3 former prime ministers that are the subject of that documentary to come out looking better than what they went in, and that was, of course, Tony Abbott, because he quite wisely decided not to participate despite the ABC badgering him to do so. And the bigger thing here, Andrew, I think is the ABC has probably inadvertently done the coalition a big favour, because if you watch the documentary series, what it reinforces is just how critical values and principles are. So much of that series is based on personalities and conflict and relatively trivial matters. But when you look at the victory in 2013 that brought the coalition into government, that was one based on values and principles of getting rid of the bad taxes, stopping the boats, starting the process for federation reform and tax reform and many other such matters. And then it devolved into matters pertaining to personality. So, look, I hope that any of the Liberals that were watching that series would say, look, this is an important reminder that we have to fight on values and principles and do what's right for the national interest, rather than getting stuck in personality disputes.
It's also a reminder, do not go on ABC programs talking about how smart you were in government or who stabbed who and all that. Just shut the hell up. I mean, it's terrible for the party. But Evelyn, Malcolm Turnbull seemed to be sending out the most insults and getting the most as well. What a negative force. And I think the Liberals are actually, they look much better without someone like, they say, oh, he's a brilliant man, much better without someone like that in there.
Absolutely. Look, it's very clear that he doesn't like his colleagues and his colleagues obviously don't like him. And to be honest, I think most of the Australian public probably feel the same way too, especially after watching this documentary series. And that's simply because he was never really a true Liberal to begin with, and it was clear. But this whole Nemesis series, it just seems like such anti-Liberal party propaganda, and you can see it by when you look in the comment section under everything. Everyone has walked away from that going, the Liberal Party is scum. And I just keep thinking, as opposed to the other lot, I mean, are we just going to wait on the edge of our seats for season 2 with the Gillard, Shorten and Rudd like stabbing in the back debacle? Ooh. Perhaps we will have to wait for season 2. But let's be real, it's the ABC. I'm not sure we'll get season 2 with that take on it. As we mentioned before there, I think the ABC is sadly more interested in one-sided things than the alleged objective and impartial journalism that they're supposed to give us with our taxpayer-funded money.
Now, Evelyn, you make a good point, right? And I suspect if they do a show like that, I have seen, fair enough, Labor Party people talking about Kevin Rudd in the most unflattering terms on the ABC. But I'm afraid that here I'd say that the propaganda you're talking about came directly from the mouths of the Liberals or ex-Liberals and Nationals that they interviewed. This is the issue. Just don't go on the show. Just put a cork in it. Just Daniel, quickly before I go, Victoria's blackout. What do we learn from this? Just that high winds knock over power lines, so what?
Well, I think it's more than that, Andrew, and I know you've been discussing facets of this on your program earlier, but I think there's a broader issue here, which I believe this could be the beginning of the end of the national electricity market, which covers about 80% of the country, everywhere other than WA and the Northern Territory. Because basically you have a situation where every other state is cross-subsidising the bad decisions of the Victorian government. The hydro is getting sucked out of Tasmania. The coal-fired power is getting sent down from Queensland and from New South Wales. The prices go up for everybody. And so the whole point of the national energy market was to deliver an efficient and productive energy system based on low-cost, reliable energy. And we had achieved that. It was one of the key achievements of the microeconomic reform era of the late 1990s. But over recent years, it's become weaponised for ideological pursuits, foremost around achieving net zero. So it wouldn't surprise me if states start backing out of the system.
I've got to cut you off there, this talk about stop the national system, the national grid, because my brother's chairman of Tasmanian Hydro, and he would have made a mozza out of Victoria yesterday. So he'll be at my, telling me to shut up about that kind of seditious talk there.
Put a cork in it, Andrew, like you told the Liberals.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much to you both. After the break, Harry and Meghan Markle, they've got a new website, but I'm afraid it just underlines what grifters they really are. Even with the King diagnosed with cancer, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, they can't give him a moment's peace. They've relaunched their website, sussex.com. And as you can see, they have their coat of arms at the top of the page, and then the office of Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Now, they might have dropped the word royal, but they clearly are still exploiting their connections to the royal family they keep trashing. Joining me from London is Patrick Christie's star presenter at GB News. Patrick, what do you make of all this?
Okay. Well, it turns out, according to someone I interviewed on my show last night, that this might actually be illegal, because you shouldn't be commercialising the royal brand, especially when you're not a working member of the royal family. So they could well be in hot water there. What I find really hilarious is the way that Harry and Meghan are described on this website. Harry described as a military hero, fine, look, 2 tours to Afghanistan, not going to dispute that. You know, mental health advocate, all right, you know, okay, he does some work there. Environmentalist as well. That's the really remarkable bit. I mean, this guy's got on more private jets than I've had hot dinners, Andrew. Meghan Markle is described as a feminist and some kind of freedom fighter and all of that. Meanwhile, you look at the way that she's treated pretty much every female member of the royal family and you think, really, what have you actually done? So, yes, this could come back to bite Harry and Meghan, because it would be quite embarrassing if they end up having to retract all of this. You know, dining out on the royal name, commercialising the royal name. And, yeah, the royal family do take an incredibly dim view of this. Like I said, it may well end up being illegal.
Well, I just think it's off, whatever it is. Patrick, you know, our government, our Labor government, has been far too close, in my opinion, to the pro-Palestinian movement and far too distant from the Israeli side in this war against the Hamas terrorist group. UK Labor is just as bad. I wonder what's going on in the water with Labor parties. Your Labor leader, Keith Starmer, has been forced to suspend 2 Labor candidates, one of them a former MP, for extraordinary anti-Israeli remarks. One, Azhar Ali, was suspended after a sick anti-Jewish conspiracy theory about that October 7 massacre that Hamas did that killed 1,200 Jews. His theory, Israel's Prime Minister deliberately let it happen. Here he is.
In Israel again, you know. We'll not get Israel over the line unless we go at them hard. No British person should be fighting for any other country. At all, full stop. It's against the law and you should be locked up.
And the other Labor candidate, Graham Jones, former MP, wanted to lock up any British Jews who fought for Israel and said F Israel, or that effing Israel. What do you make of all this? This is an embarrassment for Keir Starmer, the Labor leader, isn't it?
Yeah, they're in absolutely massive trouble, and we've started to see the polls narrow very slightly, although Labour, of course, are still in the lead. The fact is that Labour are being confronted by the reality that they helped to create here. For a very, very long period of time, they put a huge amount of faith into the quotes-unquote Muslim vote. And now there's an issue going on with the Muslim world, and they don't support that issue, and now they're being absolutely rampaged through by, shock horror, British Muslims. The fact is that Labour MPs are now being hounded in the street. The deputy leader, the chancellor, all of these MPs are being absolutely hounded on the doorstep. And that MP that you heard from there, Azhar Ali, was booted out of a curry house by people in Rochdale, where he's standing for election, because his party is not backing officially a ceasefire. And so what's happening now is that you're seeing them panicking behind closed doors and desperately resorting to more and more extreme measures in order to try to appease that Muslim vote and people who are very, very anti-Israel. And that's what's going to continue to happen. The Labour Party are in a total mess. The big problem now for Keir Starmer's Labour Party is who else was at this meeting? What else is going to come out? And there is a slow, slow drip, drip, drip. And he's set himself a precedent, OK? It is worth noting that if Keir Starmer had been in power when Hamas invaded Israel and committed that attack, he would have lost half of his cabinet. Half of his cabinet would have had to go because of their views. You cannot really run a country like that, can you? It's a good job he's in opposition and not in power at the moment.
Yeah, well, that might just be a question of time. Patrick, I don't know if you're sick of talking about this. You opened up about something personal to you on the weekend. You said Nigel Farage saved you from an addiction to alcohol. And well, why did you come out with this?
Yeah, look, I wanted to use the platform that I have here to try to help others, really. I'm very, very grateful that I managed to get help in time, and there is, no two ways about it. Unfortunately, I would not be with us now. Some people might think that was a good thing, but I would not be with us now if I'd have not managed to get myself sorted. And I just wanted to try to share a message of strength and hope for people, really, and say that if you are struggling with addiction, as millions and millions of people are, that there is a way out of it and you can go on to live a completely normal life. As I said, there is only one thing in this life that I can't do now, and that is drink. I can do absolutely everything else. And I just wanted to try to highlight that. And the messages that I've had as a result of that have been quite inspiring, actually. And I do hope that plenty of people out there now can get a bit of help if they need it, because there is a way out of this thing.
Well, Patrick, I mean, I've said it before, I couldn't help but notice how much more energy and verve and all that. You look tremendous from the time that I first met you. I mean, I thought, good on you. But what was the push finally that made you do this?
Well, initially Nigel Farage called me and said, look, I know that you're drinking too much, and that meant that I couldn't really get away with it at work anymore. And then I've managed to go 18 months now, which is, you know, a good thing one time. And I just decided that I wanted to get something out there on my own terms, you know, what this industry can be like. And I just decided that now felt like a good time.
Well, Patrick, you know, you got a fan in me, and not just for that, but for everything. I love the way you tackle life, and I like the way you've tackled your problems, and, you know, all strength to you. And I'm sure the viewers, you know, many of whom are fans of yours, will wish you the very best, and be grateful to you for sharing that message. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate that. Talk to you next week.
Take care.
That's it from me. Coming up next is Sharry Markson with some scathing stuff on Andrew Giles. After this, good night.